You know, one of the things I've noticed going down through the decades, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, is volume. And volume of hair, of course. In 1966 I had really short hair, and then in 1968 I had really long hair, and then in the 70s a lot of you will have had big hair, and then in the 1980s I suppose it was starting to come back to normal, but and now we just got what we got. But what started me along that train of thought was volume, because when I was 14 I was lucky enough to be able to buy myself a Vox AC 30 watt amplifier, and if you stood that on this stage right now and turn it up it would be loud, but then by the time it got to 68 I'd got a 50 watt Marshall amp and a 4x12 cabinet, and then I was looking at some photographs from the Isle of Wight festival a while ago, and I noticed that then I had a 200 watt high watt with a 100 watt slave. So, and then John had the same next to me, so we had 800 watts going there, and Mike Pinder, our keyboard player, had another 800 watts. He had two, like to be symmetrical, he had the same number of cabinets and amps. And even Graham, our drummer, he had amplifiers as well. And we must have been incredibly loud. I remember I could feel my flares flapping. But by the 80s, I think we'd actually in about 1969, we had met a guy called Gene Clare, who was an electronics engineer, and he built us a sound system. And then we were really loud, because his sound system to fill these places that we were playing was kind of mega. And it took me until the 80s to realize that if we had such a wonderful sound system, we could come back in volume ourselves on stage. And I think the 1980s, for the Moody Blues, certainly were the nicest time sonically. You know, we were starting to get sensible again. And I went back to using my AC 30 and one of these little Fender amps here that Mike is using as a chair. So I continued with my AC 30 for recording and all the way through. But I think when I met Mike, I realized that actually what I really want to do is play my acoustic guitars, and so I'm back to when I was about 13 years old. I did mention the 1980s, and I think for me that was my most enjoyable, and that was the decade that meant the most to me. I mean, I was alive, awake and aware, because in the 60s I kind of missed it. You know I was there, I've seen the photographs and I'm in them. But my mind was elsewhere, mystically, chemically and emotionally at the time. So in the 1980s we had an album called Long Distance Voyager, and then a song called The Wildest Dreams. I'm boasting here, untitled that. But to have success when I was 39, 40 years old when Wildest Dreams came out, and it was a real gift to me and a treasure. So those times are very special. And there's a couple of songs from that 1980s decade that well, there's a lot of songs that I really enjoyed, and we'd like to do, that have a special meaning for me. We'd like to do a couple of these now. And the first one of these is called Vintage Wine.
I remember the taste of the vintage wine from 63 to 69, and I'm proud of the things we believed in then. If I had the chance, I'd go around again. Oh, I tell you, we were young and free. Oh, I tell you, 'cause I was there, you see. Oh, 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 oh. brave. The lights go out on the empty stage. Oh, I'll tell you, music set me free. Oh, I'll tell you, it sounds so good to me. World of ours.
And if you're still uncertain just what we can be,
baby, make your mind up, get your things and follow me. 'Cause if you live to romance, baby, love will find a way. And if you're in to dreaming, dream with me. Children's prayer, the laughing eyes, the golden hair. And as hard as I try, not a day goes by I don't think of them. I tell you, we can be so free. Oh, I tell you, if you'll be there with me.